So I'm gonna actually just get started because it's 7:32, and if you've been to my meetings in the past, you know that I like to start right on time and try and keep it to a tight timeline so that I can respect all of our time. And I have an award that my friend gave me that says I just survived another meeting that could have been an email. So I like to try and prevent that as much as possible and keep us to just, getting you the most pertinent information as quickly as possible. It is so great to see everybody in your little tiny boxes. And like Nancy Kleinberg, your little picture is so good that I thought that was actually you for a minute, but that's your avatar. And it will be, I'm really looking forward to the day, hopefully next fall, when we can all gather together in person over at Ludington once more, or for a happy hour. Just to really quickly recap what some of the things you guys have done in the last 4 years, like saving healthcare about 357 million times, showing up at countless rallies and events to help people, calling friends and neighbors. Just in the last election cycle, just between August 15th and Election Day, Indivisiblers from Indivisible Laura Marion sent out 25,000 postcards. They texted 30,000 voters, and that's just the ones I know about. I know there was more than that. We had a couple hundred members doing phone banking, so I don't even know how many phone calls were made. There were people actually doing face-to-face canvassing and coordinating with countless numbers of people. And it was really incredible to see. And what I wanted to sort of share with you tonight was just what we're doing going forward, which is we're going to keep going. We've got the American Recovery Act through. There's COVID relief coming. We've done some really tremendous things supporting getting more progressives into office and getting a tenuous, but hey, I'll take it, hold in the Senate. I know even Tina Stein, who is now up in Maine, she actually drove down to Georgia with her sister to help in the Senate elections and the runoffs, which was absolutely incredible. We have a really wonderful, dedicated group of people, and this all started because of all of us feeling really hurt and hopeless. And I've been reading this book, which I highly recommend to all of the women. Men, you can read it too, but the patriarchy section may make you sad. It's called Burnout, and it's by Emily and Milia Nagoski. They're actually health educators and a choral director, and it's all about when you're living in times of constant stress, which I think we can all agree the last 4 years certainly qualify, even up through January 6th, and ways to sort of deal with it. One of the ways that I found really interesting was it's so important when you're feeling helpless to do something, to do anything, no matter how small that is. And I feel that so many people have come to Indivisible and really taken that on to do a small thing and had a truly huge impact. You cannot underestimate, even if all you did was talk to 5 neighbors or just do one text banking session over your computer one day. That had an impact. It took all of us doing these small, discrete items to do something. And the quote that really stuck with me when I was reading this book recently was, nobody can do everything. Everybody can do something. And something is anything that isn't nothing. And so I know it's been a pandemic, right? I've been homeschooling. I have a classroom set up in my garage, for those of you who don't know. I have a whole bunch of little boys who come multiple times a week and reluctantly learn math and work on social studies and science. So I've been doing that. I've been trying to help get people elected. I've been coordinating postcards. And I have not been, and there are days when I feel like I'm really not doing much, but I'm doing something. And something is anything that isn't nothing. And so we really do want to continue with that here at Indivisible. We sort of started with trying to bring you information and get information out there and to coordinate and amplify our voices with our calls to our members of Congress, with helping people understand messaging and staying focused and keeping track of what was going on. And we're going to keep doing that. We're going to keep sending out those CTAs and coordinating with other groups so that we can be amplifying our voices and being heard loudly and making it clear what matters to us. We're also going to hopefully get our election committee emails going back out, which right now are going to be focusing on some of the lesser known elections, such as magisterial judges and what is a magisterial judge, and school board and local events. and doing things like that. So we're going to be working on those things. We're also going to be continuing to bring you something that is anything that isn't nothing. Right? We're going to keep bringing you those volunteer opportunities. I'm going to put in the chat, we put together a Google form just where you can check off the types of volunteer work you might be interested in. All this does is give us a quick email database, essentially. So when we have something come up, we can email you and say, hey, you said you liked text banking. Here's a text bank coming up. They need people. That's how we functioned in the last elections. Like, I have my postcarders, you know who you are, we love you, and you guys eat up postcards like nobody's business. I had campaigns just, contact me directly, and then I partnered with Jim Remsen, and they knew that we could turn around, 2,000 postcards in 2 days because I had a list of 64 people. Some people only emailed me back once and said I can only take 25. I had some people who were saying I'll take 1,000 and please give me 500 more, because it gave them something that they were able to do, particularly in a pandemic where they couldn't go out and door knock, and they didn't feel comfortable or tech savvy enough to do text banking. So I'm going to put that in the chat. I'm going to email it out. I'm going to put it on Facebook, and it's just your email address and any of those items that you might be interested in participating in as we go forward. And it's not committing you to volunteering on this specific event or at a specific time. It's just committing you to getting the information so that if this volunteer event or need pops up at a time when you're able to do it in a way that you're able to help, you'll be connected to it. We really want to connect. We don't want to be duplicating efforts. We're not going to be like inventing our own phone banks, but there's lots of people who need us to help with phone banking, for example. The other thing I want to just quickly do, because I know we have Jamie Mogil with us, and she has another commitment a little bit later, so I want to get her on as quickly as possible. We'll come back to this. Is, as you know, Tina moved, and it's a pandemic, so I've been spread really, really thin. And I have some wonderful, wonderful women who have volunteered and agreed to help join me in leadership on a steering committee. Adrienne Seltzer, and then if you scroll through, you can kind of see them. Beth Haley is going to be working with us, Rachel Chow, and Amy Geary. And if there's anybody else who's interested in joining in with us on that steering committee and dividing up sort of the administrative and coordinating work of Indivisible Lower Merion, we would love to have you. So it is 7:39, and I said Jamie Mogil would start at 7:40. So Adrienne, you want to help Jamie get set up?
Hey. Hello. I would like to introduce my good friend, Jamie Mogil, who is Voter Services Chair for League of Women Voters, Lower Merion, Narberth. She has a wonderful resume that I won't be able to get her started at 7:40. It would be after 8 if I went through it all. So I am going to find her first and then make her co-host so she can share her screen.
All right. Thanks, Adrienne. And thank you, Ashley. I appreciate sticking to a schedule. I love that.
Oh, she's great.
Especially in this virtual world that we're living in. So yes, my name is Jamie Mogil. Some of you may know me. I know I recognize a lot of the names here, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. I'm going to get right to it. I'm just going to talk about the upcoming elections. This is something that we do with the League of Women Voters, which, similar and not so similar to the work that you do, is about informing people and making sure voters are empowered. Of course, tonight I will be doing it a bit from a nonpartisan standpoint, though I'm happy to answer questions. I will be talking about pros and cons, especially when we get to the ballot questions. So I'm just going to share my screen and get right to it. I think I'd be ready by this. Sorry, I've done these a million times. Okay, prepping for the primary. Let me just put that on the presentation. Everybody can see that? Good to go? prepping for the primary. Really important to know the election calendar, where we stand, what's coming up, what has already passed us. Some of you I know are committee members, so you know that the nominating petitions, that time period has passed us, so there'll be challenges. If there are challenges, some people are dropping out. In Montgomery County, I'll focus on Montgomery County today, you can find that on the Monco Voter Services website, the updated list, and also the candidates who withdraw. I know that's something I always look at, but vote by mail. We have this whole new election season. It's no longer election day. That could begin as soon as a couple weeks. Of course, that will be dependent on the challenges or the things of that nature, but it could be very soon. And then I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Last day to register to vote, very important, May 3rd. And the last day to apply for vote by mail is May 11th. I'm sure all of you are aware of this, you're involved, but good to tell our friends, our neighbors. I know Adrian and I are kind of always telling people there's elections every year, twice a year. It's so exciting here in Pennsylvania. Okay, primary election day, May 18th. And I can also share all this information. Ashley, anything you want from the slideshow, I can also send to you. Okay, register. It's the big deal. You can't vote. You need to be registered. Register, check your registration, always important. You might think you're registered. You never know. It could have been a glitch. You want to check your registration and apply for vote by mail on Votes PA. I call it the Vote Spa. It's a good thing, a good place to go. Make sure you're registered. Voters need to apply for vote by mail, even if you applied and you voted by mail last year. That's that letter everybody got. If you applied for vote by mail, people were confused by it. That's part of Act 77. It is a permanent list, but it's an annual permanent list. So every year you will be asked, do you want to get do you want to apply for vote by mail, and do you want to get it both for the primary and the general election? Now you can opt out of that. That's what's great. You can choose not to do that and go in person. It's so wonderful. We finally have some options. Whether I always tell people, you do you want to vote by mail, great. You want to go in person, make sure you vote. But stay tuned. The league, we work with Monco Voter Services. I have asked them about drop boxes and satellite offices. Will it be to the extent that we had it in the presidential election last year? I do not think so, but I do think that we will have some drop boxes and satellite offices. Again, the more accessible voting is, the more people vote and the easier it is. So check vote411.org. That's the league's nonpartisan candidate and election information site. So you can type in your address and see all the candidates in the area. We are working to make sure that we have them for all of the various offices. And very important, and I know Indivisible is pushing this, very important that any registered voter can vote in the PA primaries for the ballot questions. The largest growing base of voters in Pennsylvania are unaffiliated voters. Those are independents. So we want to make sure that they know that they can vote on the ballot questions. So what's coming up? This I did for Lower Merion, where I live too and grew up. Township Commissioner, all the even wards. We have our school board, the 4 at-large positions. At-large, we have some other school districts. They have regional, at-large, different types of voting. But for here, that includes Narberth in the Lower Merion School District. We have our Township Tax Collector. We have magisterial district judges. I know you mentioned that, Ashley. So we have 3 of those. And then our top 3 courts, the Supreme Court, the Commonwealth Court, and the Superior Court in Pennsylvania. So I put the availability on those benches. And then we have 1 seat available on the Monco Court of Common Pleas. And then the all-important judges of elections and our inspectors. Those are the, and yes, Adrian is a judge of elections. I too work in the polls. And that's very important that we have people who are committed. And it's always important to remember the majority and minority people associated with political affiliation, and that's not true. The majority inspector is the person who receives the most votes, so the majority. And then the ballot questions, which I'll get more into in detail in a minute. So lots coming up, very important elections, everything that impacts your everyday life, whether you have a traffic ticket, you need a pothole, pothole in front of your house, or the curriculum that will be on your child's, for the curriculum for your child. So lots of important things. Pennsylvania courts, I know Indivisible was working as part of a group to counter a different a possible ballot question, constitutional amendment. So I'm not going to go too much into the courts because I think you had presentations on that, if I was told correctly. But it's important to know what is our court structure. So this is this nice pyramid chart that I like. And so you see the top of the chart, the Supreme, the Superior, and the Commonwealth. Again, those are our top courts. And then we have the Court of Common Pleas. That's that one seat I said that is available on our Monco. So Delco has several seats available. So that's going to be county by county. And then we have our minor courts. Those are the magisterial, or as they're called in Philadelphia, municipal courts or traffic courts. And those are like if you get, like I said, a traffic ticket, but they do hear preliminary low-level felonies, criminal cases. So it's very important to know who we're voting for each of those races. Oh, and then of course, if you have questions or anything like that, of course I can answer them. And now electing judges in PA, I just think it's important to have an overview. We are the only state in the United States, so we're a Commonwealth, but we're the only state that allows and does primary elections for judges in odd number years. That is unfortunate, as there's usually a depressed voter turnout after a major election. However, we're going to encourage people because we're going to tell them how important these elections are. And we also are one of very few states left that do partisan judicial elections, meaning that we have primary winners for the major parties, and then they go on in a general election. Now, once elected, those top courts, they're retained with a yes or no vote. Now, I put this in here for a 10-year term because it's very important that when they're retained, we vote on retaining them or not. It's without party affiliation. Many people tell me they get confused because why is this person's name on both ballots, meaning like Democrat or Republican, depending on your party. So it's really important. If you want to look this up, you can do it on the Bar Association website. I even tell people just to Google, but again, vote411.org, the league's website, will be able to help you actually map out your entire ballot before you even go to vote. And now those are on limited terms, but due to a constitutional amendment ballot question that came up years ago, it is set at retirement age of 75. So we see how powerful these ballot questions can be because they impact all levels of our government. District, magisterial, and as I said in Philadelphia, they're called municipal judges. They're a bit different. They have 6-year terms. There is no retention, like what I mentioned for those yes or no 10-year terms. But very important, there is no law degree or bar license required to be a district magisterial judge. I think somebody's seen my tweet. It got very popular when I said, you need more hours to be a cosmetologist, a masseuse, than you do to be, and training, than you do to be a district magisterial judge. Now, of course, it's very important to have training if you're going to be doing cosmetology, but my point is it's probably important to have a legal, and there is a course that these judges take, and you can see whether they've passed it or not in their bio on Vote 411. But cross-filing, I just want to point this out too. Again, whether Democrat or Republican, whichever party, very important to know, Court of Common Pleas and these magisterial district judges are allowed to cross-file. So you want to make sure that you know, if you prefer whichever party, that you look this up and you're aware, so that you're voting in line with your choice. Okay, so any questions on the judges stuff? Because I'm going to get right into the ballot questions.
Someone asked if all the positions that you listed were party elections.
The prior slide? Oh, I'm already moving ahead. These elections? Yes. So in Pennsylvania, we are a closed primary state. So that means with respect to voting in a primary, you will see the candidates for the major two parties, that is Republican and Democrat. You can run independently, but you would not run in the primaries if you are an independent or of a different party. So yes, if you are a major party, I think I'm answering this correctly. I'm not really sure the context of the question, but I think this is what it meant. So hopefully, does that answer it? I hope so, whoever asked that. All right, but I want to get to the ballot questions because they're a bit more substantive. Really important to know how we even get a constitutional amendment. So it is a long, arduous process. This was something that was in the news, so I'll give this as an example when we get to that part. But it is an amendment proposed via a bill, like any other bill in our General Assembly, which is made of the House or the Senate. And the bill must pass both the PA House and Senate by a simple majority in each chamber, and not just once, but in a consecutive session. So 1 year and then another year, and it must be consecutive. And then it requires to be noticed and so that means advertised in every county in a newspaper. The example I was going to talk about was the unfortunate resignation of our, Adrian's holding them up, yes. They were published in the newspaper. And our Secretary of State, our former Secretary of State, Kathy Boockvar, as you all probably know, did resign because it fell under her purview to make sure, although it wasn't discovered until later, that a overwhelming bipartisan support for increasing the statute of limitations for sexual abuse victims. Well, that if you don't follow this process, that means that the entire thing falls apart. And that is unfortunately what happened. They are looking to find, they being the legislature, find a way to go around doing this PA constitutional amendment. But I give that as a cautionary tale that this must be followed to have an actual amendment come to us on the ballot. And then it comes to us on the ballot, us being the voters. Very important, I put this in red, it cannot be vetoed by the governor like a normal bill would be possible to be vetoed. So really important that you have to follow this process to have it come to us. You should also know, and this is going to be with respect, now I'm going to get into the questions themselves, that most bills, including the bills that come as constitutional amendments to our PA Constitution, usually have no hearings, no public input, no testimony, no expert input, and then they're thrust upon us as the voters with very little input or time to review them. So I really appreciate that Indivisible and other groups like the League, that we make sure that people have the information so that they can be better informed as to how they would like to vote on these important amendments to our PA Constitution. So I'm just gonna get right into it because I know I want to be conscious of time. So ballot question number 1, I'm going to give you the question. This is the simple language. People ask me, who writes this? It is not the governor. It is not even the legislature. It is the Department of State, and then it is approved by the AG. This actually was in the news as well because these bills were proposed by the majority party Republicans, but it was Democrats who oversee the Department of State, as well as our AG, Josh Shapiro. And so they came under attack for skewing questions to seem favorable to the answer that they would like, as opposed to what the GOP would like. But we'll get into it and we'll talk. And then I have a if you vote yes or if you vote no. And again, Ashley, I'll send you all of this information as well as the pros and cons. So nobody has to worry about memorizing anything. So the question really comes down to whether you think that the existing law should be changed and increasing the power of the General Assembly, the legislature, to unilaterally terminate or extend a disaster emergency declaration and the powers of the Commonwealth agencies to address the disaster regardless of its severity pursuant to that declaration through passing a concurrent resolution by simple majority, thereby removing the existing check and balance of presenting a resolution to the governor for approval or disapproval. You may be like me, even I showed this to my mom. She's like, what is a concurrent what? It's very confusing. So what does it mean? Well, if you vote yes, you're agreeing to give the legislature, by a simple majority vote, the sole power to take away the governor's existing authority to make disaster emergency declarations. So we have a shifting in the balance of powers. Now, if you vote no, what does that mean? Well, you disagree with giving the legislature, by a simple majority vote, the sole power to take away the governor's existing authority to make disaster emergency declarations. Now, we're very familiar with emergency declarations. We're still living in them in this time of COVID. And that's exactly, so I'm just going to talk about some context, but I'll do that after I talk about ballot question number 2, because they really go together. And this is the GOP, the majority party in our legislature, responding to the governor, a Democrat, making these emergency declarations with respect to COVID. So this one is even longer. So I'm just going to read it out. Shall the Pennsylvania Constitution be amended to change existing law so that a disaster emergency declaration will expire automatically after 21 days, regardless of the severity of the emergency, unless the General Assembly takes action to extend the disaster emergency? The governor may not declare a new disaster emergency to respond to the dangers facing the Commonwealth unless the General Assembly passes a concurrent resolution. The General Assembly enacts new laws for disaster management. Okay, that's a whole bunch of stuff there too. So if you vote yes, what does that mean? Well, you agree to change the existing law to limit any governor, so that's not just the current governor, but any future governor's disaster emergency declaration, no matter the severity, to 21 days from 90, it's current law, unless and until the legislature votes by a simple majority to extend the disaster emergency declaration and take away the governor's authority to act in emergency situations. It's still pretty long, but it's the most concise way I could put it. Essentially, again, it's the shifting of the balance of powers, changing existing law, which gives authority to the governor to make and oversee and manage disasters. But what if you vote no? What does that mean? Well, you would disagree with changing existing law that provides any governor with the power to issue emergency declarations without a 21-day limitation or a simple majority vote by the legislature. And any governor retains authority to act in emergency and disaster situations. Still pretty wordy. So now I'm just going to kind of combine 1 and 2 and talk about the pros and the cons. So what if you were to talk to, and this is really important, what if you were to talk to somebody after you saw this presentation tonight, like your neighbor, your friends, your family, and you said, you know, the questions 1 and 2, what are they really about? Well, they're about not only emergency powers, but they're really about the balance of power and the separation of powers that exists now in Pennsylvania. I think I mentioned this all came about because of the COVID stay-at-home order a year ago, and that was challenged by the GOP. So we do currently, this is very important, we do currently have a checks and balance in place of a override on a veto. So what happened is the General Assembly chose to be done with the stay-at-home order and the other restrictions, very necessary health restrictions due to the pandemic. And the governor vetoed that. And then it went back to the legislature, and that is required a 2/3 vote. So 2/3, they missed it. And now they were pissed. And so the GOP, they went to court, and our current law is that that's exactly what's needed for things like emergency declarations. To override that veto, to undo it, you need 2/3 of a legislative vote. So where are we now? Well, now the legislature would like to take all of that authority away from the governor. And I put this in here for context. There's only 4 states that do this, that require to vote on extending or terminating a governor's emergency declaration by the legislature. And you see the states there, because I think it's important to know this is not something that is very popular and done across the United States. So votes, what would people be thinking? Why would I vote for this? Well, it strengthens the legislature's power to act or, end or continue an emergency declaration without that veto power. Now, some of us may be in favor of that. Some people want to limit executive power. So that's about weakening the governor's powers during an emergency to extend a declaration. It also disperses authority for creating and ending disaster emergency resolutions, which right now the concentration of that power does lie with the governor and his cabinet. And it also removes that customary legislative procedure requiring a 2/3 legislative vote to override a governor's veto. Now, many of these could also be arguments against. I'm very aware of that, but we do have to have this kind of pros and cons if people ask about this. So what are the arguments against it? Well, it's really reducing the whole point of why we elect an individual statewide to give him that, or her, hopefully one day we have a her, to act in an emergency disaster. We have one of the largest legislatures in the entire country, 253 individuals. I give you a cautionary tale. Look at what happened in Texas. I have family in Texas. Can you imagine every 21 days having to convene the legislature in a emergency? We're not talking health. What if we had a natural disaster, like what happened in Texas? How would they be able to get together and convene? We have a very large Commonwealth. And we also see that you could lose power. They might not even be able to do it digitally. So that's why I have here that it creates logistical and administrative hurdles that really could impact us, maybe even cost lives, can worsen a already existing disaster. And also really important, it could interfere with us getting federal aid and money that is tied to declaring a natural disaster. So there's a lot of reasons here. I'm not going to beat this one with a dead horse. I think everybody Indivisible wise is on notice of these 2 ballot questions. But of course, I'll answer any questions. It's in the chat. Is there any questions about this one?
Yeah,
Yes,
I actually have
in
one.
response to Wolf's COVID. Hi, Amy. This was in response to Wolf's COVID declaration and the ensuing challenge that went to the Supreme Court, or PA Supreme Court. And that's why they want to the GOP would like to do away with the customary 2/3 legislative vote to override a governor's veto, which, as I put here, it only happens in 4 other states. So, I'm not going to say the league doesn't take a position, but for me, this is really about an imbalance of power and separation of powers. And I just tell people, we don't need this. We already have a checks and balance. Sorry they couldn't make it at the 2/3 veto, but this is not just about COVID. This is about any other governor in the future, any other disaster. Right now we're talking about health, but what if it was something like Texas? It could be very serious consequences for us to have something like this. It does, to me, it also defies common sense that you'd want to convene 253 people and have to report to them. Right now, the health department or whatever department it may be, they work together with one person's cabinet. It would be reporting to 253 people, which again is a logistical nightmare. So again, long story short, it balances the separation of powers and really could be very serious and dangerous consequences. So moving on, I think everybody's good. They know how to vote?
I
Oh,
did. I
Adrian?
did. So the legislature now could vote to end the emergency declaration. The governor could veto it, and then they could come back with a 2/3 majority to override the veto. So there is a way to end it if there were enough votes.
Correct. And that was what was attempted last year and failed. And this was proposed, these bills were proposed, and then they were voted on again, as I talked about the 2 consecutive sessions, and that's why we have them. So yes, very important. We do already have, like I said, a checks and balance. And I think it's important to note, we're also looking at it from the perspective of right now we have two different parties. It could be one party. Imagine if it was just one party with a concentration of power. We already have a very much a gerrymandered district. It could also be that you could see the partisan influence of withholding aid to other regions. So if you're in a more rural area and you're the dominant party, you can potentially withhold aid to different, more urban areas if they are of a different political affiliation. Does everybody get what I'm saying? The possible dangers of something like this. All right, so moving on, 8:08, so I want to keep to time for Ashley. I said I wouldn't talk too much. Okay, ballot question number 3. This is one that we call in the law a red herring. You know, you look at it, you're like, yeah, much, I'm going to talk about Marcy's law, very similar to Marcy's law when we saw it, because, hey, who wouldn't support victims' rights? I hope everybody would say yes, that they support victims' rights. But often there's much more than what's on the surface. So the question here says, shall the Pennsylvania Constitution be amended by adding a new section providing that equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged because of an individual's race or ethnicity? I read this and I'm like, yeah, I'm thinking, yeah. So if I vote yes, what does that mean? You agree that all Pennsylvania state, county, and local governmental agencies and institutions, everything from Penn State all the way to Lower Merion Township, cannot restrict or deny an individual's equal rights under Pennsylvania law because of race or ethnicity. So their race or ethnicity. But if you vote no, okay, you can see I've changed this here. You disagree with changing the Pennsylvania Constitution because the Equal Protection Clause of the US Constitution and federal law currently provides broader protections against denying or restricting rights on the basis of race and ethnicity. I may be confusing you. I'm just going to give you a minute there. I see people looking at it. What does this mean? So let's talk about it. So I just want to give some context of what does it mean that I'm saying this is more than what it appears. I've seen actually many postings that this creates a new class. I've seen the term class. I'm not going to get too much. I am a lawyer. There's probably other lawyers on here. I'm not going to get too much into the constitutional law of things. But the key word being individual in that question, if you notice here, it says because of an individual's race or ethnicity. An individual, I think we don't need to be lawyers to understand that an individual means one person. It does not mean a class or group of individuals. So amendments and propositions like this have led to bans on race consideration by governmental entities. So that's really important. Right now, we have agencies, schools, even government contracts making sure that minority-owned firms, that's groups, racial groups, to make sure that we have protections to really undo the inequities that have happened due to discrimination based on race and ethnicity. So in 2014, the US Supreme Court, that's when Justice Kennedy was still on the bench, they upheld a ban by Michigan that was on their ballot. So it was a ballot measure, and they voted in to ban affirmative action. Affirmative action is race consideration in admissions. I'm putting it in a short base. So race decisions. And because the case, they didn't get to actually whether deciding the substance of it, it was really about the fact that the voters, so just like us, how we're about to choose yes or no on these constitutional amendments, Michigan voters decided on this ban. And so they never got to the consideration of racial preferences and by governmental entities. Instead, it was upheld because it was a states' rights issue. So these arguments for it, well, it promotes states' rights, meaning us in Pennsylvania, we would have law independent of the US Constitution and federal law, which right now is that the Equal Protection Clause, and does have strict scrutiny, meaning it's scrutinized to the highest level when there is racial discrimination. But we would have our own law independent of that for an individual who's discriminated against and claims discrimination based on their race and ethnicity. And so this makes sure that this is saying again that individuals cannot be discriminated against due to their race or ethnicity by organizations. Like I said, I was giving you examples like Penn State or any other state-based agency. And it prohibits legislation in the future that would be inconsistent with Pennsylvania law if this were to become the law of Pennsylvania. So why arguments against it? Because it sounds so great. Well, it's really providing an opportunity for Pennsylvania entities to no longer consider these group, racial, and ethnic considerations in hiring, admissions, and access to other opportunities. Yes, it could still continue, but it opens the door that they could be potentially banned. Again, because of that word individual, it's very scary because somebody who we think this is protecting minorities, right? And I'm sure this was the hope and the basis of this, but it does open the door to claims, that a white man could say, well, I was discriminated against because I'm white. That is totally a viable claim under this, if this becomes law. So this opens the door to these so-called reverse discrimination cases. And I think the thing that stuck out to me is that it doesn't really do anything new. I'm looking, as this is me speaking personally and not on behalf of the league, but I would look to law that would broaden the protections for classes of individuals who are not protected, including those of their sexual orientation. So if you're gay or lesbian, we do not have any of those protections now under Pennsylvania law. So I know this is a lot that I'm thrusting on you, and you might be saying, well, gosh, I don't really understand this. So of course, I'm available to answer questions. I'm gonna stop talking now and sharing my screen. New share. How do I stop sharing? Stop sharing. Okay, I'm back. So I know that some of you, I have spoken to some of you about this. I'm also going to share the pros and cons and a bit of the context and about that Michigan case that I said. It's all laid out and it will be on Vote 411 for the league, but I'll share that document with you, Ashley, so that you can share it out. But it's very important to know that, it's often hard for us to interpret what the legislators do. I mean, often I don't even think the legislators know what they're doing. And they put this upon us and they haven't really thought about the long-term implications. And that's where we come in, whether it's groups like Indivisible, the League, ACLU, NAACP, right? That we often have to take these hard positions, like what happened with the Marsy's Law Challenge. And I should say that some of you may know me, that I was involved with that challenge as well. So it can be hard, and I'm still told, like, why did you fight against victims' rights? But that's not true. Actually, that there was a lot more to that ballot question than creating victims' rights. And we actually do have a victims' rights statute, thank goodness, and more funding should go toward that. But here, this is something that is much bigger than just saying individuals should be protected from discrimination based on their race and ethnicity. Any other questions? Oh, I see Nancy. Can you go back? Oh.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Nancy, hi.
Hi, so I know you're not in charge of everything, but I think I heard that very often constitutional amendments do pass.
Yes, good point. Since
Well-
1995, we've had 10 ballot measures and every single one has passed.
So I guess so we're about a month away from when we're.
Is that me breaking up or Nancy?
Nancy, I don't know if you can hear us. I think you.
Very little time.
There we go.
To tell people about it. Oh, am I unstable? My thing says, can you hear me?
You're back, you're stable.
Thank you. We have very little time to tell people constitutional amendments are on, and we have extremely little time to tell them why one that sounds good isn't good. And what I'm just really confused about, and this is what I know you're not in charge of, a Democrat proposed this, to the best of my knowledge, and Democrats voted for it. So now, like, wouldn't it be good if they checked with the ACLU and lawyers before they pass things that we're supposed to vote against? You can't comment?
I'm trying to be nice in my response, Nancy.
Okay.
This is very similar to what we encountered with Marcy's Law, right? Which also was proposed and had overwhelming support, unanimous voting both times for that, as well as this. So my answer to that is, I think, again, the real crux of things that are happening in Harrisburg is that we do not have a process by which they require any expert testimony. There are no hearings, and it is unfortunate. I have, Nancy, I know you and I have separately been talking about this. I have separately been trying to do some triage and get people to come out and make a statement, but unfortunately, it seems that the consequences of this, and maybe even talking to a constitutional law professor, which, my goodness, I could turn to the right and find, a lawyer there who would probably tell you this is not really what I think they were intending. It could also be the case, Nancy, maybe it won't happen, but I think, unfortunately, if you look at precedent and what's happened in other states, it has the potential for being very dangerous. So I'm trying to be nice in my response, because I think my own political affiliation.
One more question. So right now, the ACLU, no, the League of Women, no, you're not taking positions.
I am pushing, actually. I have just today presented something to the League in hopes that they will take a position, because the League has a very strong policy of equality of rights and opportunities for all. It's under our, for any of you who are a League member, everything is done by consensus and a platform. So just like with Marcy's Law, when I presented the challenge there, I had to present it to the board for approval to take a stand. Will we still have all the pros and cons? Yes. But I do think it's important. I have spoken to, I work for Common Cause. I've tried to get them. I think many of us were distracted, and understandably so, by the judicial redistricting constitutional potential. And it's still out there. It could be on our general election ballot. But I think that's what happened. And then I've heard from the Dems. I know, Nancy, you and I were trying. Oh, yes. That a lot of this comes down to the fact that they see ballot questions as nonpartisan. I don't agree with that at all, because these are bills that are passed and have political impact. But I know I am trying very hard to get them to come out with this. And I know the governor's office, particularly with respect to question 1 and 2, is playing this carefully, because certainly this is a referendum on him, whether that's you don't agree with the vaccine rollout, you don't like that your school was closed, even though he's not in charge of that. These are all things that we have to kind of play carefully, because people do overwhelmingly vote yes for these, and this could have a very bad impact, 1, 2, and 3.
Well, a really last quick thing.
That's
So
okay.
every state rep that I've talked to about this has said, vote no, and the jury's still out on number 3. Not one has committed vote no.
Well, that's because
vote
we're making
yes.
headway, Nancy. Before it was no, yes, if you
Okay.
recall. But
Okay.
thanks to some who are on this call, we are making some headway, because unfortunately, I don't think there was the consideration of talking to lawyers, talking to experts, and again, be very careful in who we're promoting, and who we work with, and continue our battles. Even you're indivisible, like, you still need to keep going, even if Trump's out of office, right? It's even those who are in office that we need to hold accountable and make sure. One of the main platforms of the league as well is to have a rules process that we do not have in the legislature, meaning we should be having hearings, we should be having expert testimony. And so that's something that should happen before thrusting this again on the public, an unknowing public. It is very unfair, and to me, completely undemocratic. So I hope I kind of answered your question, Nancy. I mean, separately, I'm doing the best I can. So we just have to keep pushing, and I think we're starting to get some headway. And I know Adrian was working as well, and I'm trying. There's also the politics of all these good government groups and nonprofits and how they work and they function, unfortunately. Okay, I hope I helped everybody.
Thank you very much. If anybody else thinks of any other question, oh, Phyllis, you have your hand up. Is it a quick question?
Hi, Phyllis.
Is this correct that the third ballot question was actually introduced by State Senator Vincent Hughes in June, not, a month, less than a month after George Floyd was killed? So my question is, who writes the wording? I mean, did he write it and just put in individual, not realizing what he was, setting the Republicans up for? Or did the Republicans write the wording, take his thoughts and use it? How did that happen, that this pure intention was so corrupted?
It was proposed, but I think as proposed, and it did make public news, that the real crux of it was to include other classes like sexual orientation that were subsequently removed. The only public, I wouldn't even call it a debate, was really on those additions. And I bring that up because this was something like, oh, we'll all get this passed, we can all agree on it. How it was reviewed? Well, different legislators, including Vincent Hughes, who's been a long time. And for those of you who aren't aware, he is a Black man. He is from Philadelphia, longtime state senator and Democrat. I think this is just another thing. Like, do you have a policy team? Do you have lawyers? Are you working in coordination to understand the short term versus the long term? I have been asked, Phyllis, it's a good point you brought this up. Well, what does our current law say? And there is a law in the Constitution, the PA Constitution, that does say about gender. And it does say individual, that similar language, but it's not comparing apples and apples, okay? Because as I explained to you, the protections in the US Constitution And so maybe they were looking at my thoughts were they were probably looking at what was already there and just taking out gender and putting in race and ethnicity. But gender does not have what we call under the law strict scrutiny, that highest level of scrutiny that racial protections do. And there's also not the types of race conscious considerations in admissions, hiring, and government contracts, and the long extent of it that we don't have for gender. So I'm thinking maybe that's what happened. I don't know. I'm trying to rationalize what I think is really very unfortunate. And so it's also, I'm sure, very embarrassing. I don't know. I'm trying to be nice about it, but it's very important that we get the word out, because I do foresee this going down a very dangerous road, especially with our current, I don't even call them GOP. They're from a different level. Okay, that's I hope I answered your question, Phyllis.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
That was great. Thank you so much, Jamie. I really
Okay.
appreciate all of that. And for those of you who are not taking copious notes, we're going to have copies of everything. And we're going to
I'm going to send you like a really nice, it has like the whole thing, like pros and cons for each question.
It has columns and everything, guys. So
yes,
it's going to be
all
beautiful.
nice and set out.
Yeah, make sure the formatting doesn't get messed up. And that way we can also get it to everybody who couldn't be here tonight. Because like I said, there were several meetings going on, and with everything going on in Lower Merion, trying to find a date that Jamie could be here and then that we could be here, particularly with the new school reopening happening next week and extra meetings from that. I know Monday nights are tough, but it was really wonderful to see everybody on here, and I'm glad that we could make this work. I do want to say one of the things we've talked about as a steering committee is right.
I'm gonna go because I have an 8:30.
All right, thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody. Good to see your faces, even virtually.
So if you have questions for Jamie, like, we can always reach out to her and get those answered as well if we don't know the answers ourselves.
I talk to her every day, so.
Yeah, so we've got it covered. But I did want to say, one of the things we were talking about was the importance, and Jamie touched on this a little bit at the beginning. Everyone in Pennsylvania can vote on a ballot initiative. But it's very well known to people that it's a closed primary. And so we're missing out on a large segment of voters a lot of times because people who are unaffiliated don't bother with the primary, particularly because they don't realize necessarily that these ballot initiatives are out there. They're not as publicized, and they think, well, I can't vote because I'm not voting in a Democratic or Republican primary. And just to give you some quick numbers for Montgomery County, in the past, like 14-ish months, in terms of newly registered voters, around 13,000 were Democrats, yay, and 5,800 were Republicans, and 27,000 were unaffiliated. That's the numbers we're talking about. So nearly more than twice, 10,000 more people registered unaffiliated than registered for either of the other parties. So we need to get this information out there. And this is where, in some ways, for people who, don't have a whole lot of time, this is one of those, something is anything that's not nothing. This is the importance of talking to your friends, talking to your neighbors, talking to people in Pennsylvania and saying, hey, there's a primary coming up and there's ballot initiative questions on there. And everyone can and should vote on them. And then you can move into a conversation about what those are. But I know for myself, I can think of, 4 or 5 friends who I know are unaffiliated voters because my children ask them on play dates, because that's the kind of kids I have. And so they ask their friends' parents about their voting. And so I'm going to be sending out emails to everybody I know saying, here's just some information about the election, and these are the ballot questions. This is what you need to know. So even if you are not voting in the Republican or Democratic primary, you still can vote on these ballot questions. So when I'm sending out information for vote by mail, I'm going to be hitting that as well. And I also am telling people, I tell people everywhere I go, you know me, I'll tell the checkout girl at the supermarket to make sure she knows to vote in the primary, because also some areas may not be having as many visible elections. I mean, here everybody's talking about the school board election in Lower Merion. It's really visible, but other municipalities may not be having that. And so just getting that information out to anyone you know in the state, that's going to be huge. And we're going to be hooking up with some groups for some text banking. DCLMN is going to be text banking. I just got an email from, I think, Jane, that they're going to be text banking, trying to text bank unaffiliated voters to let them know to get out and vote as well. That's something that we at Indivisible can help support. And again, that's where, and I'm going to put it in the chat now, if you can fill out this Google form for us with your contact info, so when these opportunities occur, we can get the information out to you quickly and get you connected with people so you can sign up to help with these more organized efforts.
Also in our CTAs, you can share our CTAs with other people, forward them to your friends and neighbors. And yeah.
And we will be also, and we've done this in the past, we're going to help provide for you. They were talking about cross-filing and who's who, and we will be providing sort of a sample ballot with that for folks specific to Lower Merion and Narberth, so that you can see, because not everybody knows who Christina Fink is and if she's cross-filed for school board. In case you don't know, she organized the bus down to stop the steal.
From Lower and Upper Merion.
Yeah, from Lower and Upper Merion.
And one thing, since I'm sorry to jump in, but
Right
just
ahead.
since you're right on that topic, that when Jamie was talking about cross-filing, she did not mention school board candidates cross-file, so that some of the people on the Democratic ballot are Republicans and vice versa.
Yeah, so
there's only one Democrat who cross-filed.
Yep. So we're going to get that information out. And, and our election committee has done a great job, I think, in the past of making a printout that you can take with you instead of just grabbing the one with the endorsed candidates. I'm not really sure what even that's going to fully look like with school board the way it is right now.
We're not, the Democratic list will list everyone on the Democratic ballot and identify and do what we've been doing in Indivisible.
Yeah.
And identify who's a Democrat, who's an endorsed Democrat, and who is a cross-filed Republican.
So we'll get all of that out to everybody, and some information about the candidates that you can share with people. Obviously, you can forward any of our CTA's election emails. We'll have information up on Facebook. We're going to have this meeting available. I'm going to have the ballot initiative information from Jamie for when you want to talk to people. It's 8:34, so I'm going to try and wrap it up as quickly as humanly possible. But I just do want to stress, we do have to keep going, right? We're gonna continue with our work, helping educate people, helping people know what's going on, keeping an eye on things. I mean, there's voter suppression laws going up all over the country to try and help solidify the GOP. Because really the only way they're really going to hold on to power going forward is to have fewer people vote. So we're going to be
Jessica Diamond is trying to say something.
So Jesse, do you have your hand? I don't see your hand up.
Oh, it was up for a bit, and I just put it in the chat in case I know you have to wrap it up soon. So
no, that's fine. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, I just that it's because the judicial gerrymandering got pushed to the fall. The real big push on the ballot questions got sort of slow pedaled by the state Democratic Party and whatever. So I'm just wondering if you are looking to coordinate and extend through the reach of the other Indivisible chapters, especially with the outreach to independents. That'd be great.
Yeah, and that's something we've talked about with Indivisible statewide. And I know Becca is here briefly. She's the coordinator for Pennsylvania and Delaware. And I know that initially because she's not here now, so I can totally say that the mothership was resistant to statewide, to looking at state activity and state government, and really wanted us to keep focusing on pushing for a progressive agenda nationally, which of course we still will. But that needle has definitely shifted. They just sent out to leadership asking what all of our state house and senatorial districts are, which is something they've never done before. And, and I think that that's really important to remember, that we do have a network statewide. And so a lot of times in Lower Merion, we're like, well, yeah, we can get this information out about the ballot initiatives here. And that matters, right? We in Montgomery County and in these counties had a huge impact on the presidential election. And we can have a huge impact on these ballot initiatives with voter turnout, but there's a lot of people working throughout the state who can actually help with this. And there's people who are there, and they're in smaller groups and larger groups, but definitely getting that out and having there be a coordinated push on that. And a lot of this just conversational campaign, because they're going to know more who the unaffiliated voters are in their area. We're not able to just send out, our blasts everywhere just ourselves. So there's definitely work on that, amplifying it statewide. And we're going to be working more to coordinate across districts.
I've already talked to Becca about the questions, and that's part of the reason she was here too, because I wanted to introduce her to Jamie to get that perspective.
So I think there's definitely been a shift, particularly in a state like Pennsylvania, and particularly now that there's a lot of attention being paid to things like for the judicial gerrymander. The proposed judicial gerrymander was New York Times above the fold news at one point, and a lot of these in state legislatures are suddenly getting a lot of attention because of these proposed voter suppression laws. And that was part of the GOP's kind of master plan, right? Was to take over these state legislatures, and people are really sitting up and taking notice and realizing how important a role that plays as well. So we'll be doing that also. So I'm gonna wrap it up because I'm getting up at 5 to run in the morning, and I have to go see this new hamster tower that was put together. In fact, the hamster owner just poked his head in to see if I'm done. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them, and we're all happy to answer them. And just, if you kind of scroll through again, I just want to thank Beth Haley and Adrian and Rachel Cho and Amy Geary for stepping in with me as part of the steering committee. And Jessie will still be, she has a lot of other things, but she's still steering committee emeritus with us, which I really appreciate. And I'm still in touch with Tina up in Maine. Her son is living proof that you can have a small business with a $20 hourly wage for your workers. So if anybody's talking to you about the minimum wage, you can point to Fogtown Brewery as a small business that manages to pay their workers a living wage for something new. But it's been great seeing everybody. We're going to do this again. Hopefully once the weather is nicer, maybe we can actually meet up outside in a safely distanced manner and see each other face to face, because I miss seeing and chatting with everybody. And I really appreciate all of you and all of the work you've done. If you can get to that Google form in the chat, that's great. I'll also send it out on the Google group, and I will put it over on Facebook. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks, everybody.
Night. Okay.
You done?
I'm just about done. Yeah. You want to come poke your head over?
No.
No?